Hi, second graders. I am going to read you chapter 5 and 6 of The Capture. So in chapter 4, we read about how the Gylfi whispered to Soren that they're moon blinking us, she whispered. And so here's the start of chapter 5, moon blinking. What? It felt so good to say a wah sound that Soren almost missed the answer. Didn't your parents tell you about the dangers of sleeping under the full shine? What is full shine? Soren asked. When did you hatch out? 3 weeks ago, I think, or so my parents told me. But again, Soren was not really sure what a week was. Ah, that explains it. And in Tidal, there are great trees, right? Gylfi asked. Oh, yes, many, and thick with beautiful fir needles and spruce cones and leaves that turn golden and red. Again, Soren wasn't sure about leaves turning, for he had never seen them anything but golden and red, but his parents had told him that once they were green in a time called summer. Clud had hatched out near the end of the green time. So they're talking about the different seasons, right? And so Soren's only 3 weeks old, and he hatched out, he'd only seen them golden and red. So can you make an inference about when Soren was born? Probably in the fall. And then Clud hatched out near the end of the green time. So maybe end of summer? Well, you see, I hatched out more than 3 weeks ago. They spoke softly, so softly, and managed to maintain the sleep position, but neither one of them was the least bit sleepy. I was hatched after the time of newing. The newing? When is that? Asked Soren. You see, the moon comes and the moon goes, and at the time of the newing, when the moon is no thicker than one single thin, downy feather, well, that is the first glint of the new moon. Then every day it grows thicker and fatter until there is a full shine, like now. And it might stay that way for 3 or 4 days. Then comes the time of the dwenking. Instead of growing thicker and fatter, the moon dwenks and becomes thinner until once more it is no thicker than the thinnest strand of down, and then it disappears for a while. I never saw this. At least, I don't think I have. Oh, it was there, but you probably didn't really see because your family's nest was in the hollow of a great tree in a thick forest. But elf owls like myself live in deserts, not so many trees, and many of them are not very leafy. We can see the whole sky nearly all the time. My, Soren sighed softly, and that is why they teach all of us elf owls about full shine. Although most owls sleep during the day, sometimes, especially after a hunting expedition, one might be tired and sleep at night. This can be very dangerous if one sleeps out bald in the light of a full moon. It confuses one's head. How? Soren asked. I'm not sure. My parents never really explained it, but they did say that the old owl Rockmore had gone crazy from too much full shine. Gylfi paused, then hesitating went on. They even said that he often did not know which was up and which was down, and that finally he died of a broken neck when he thought he was lifting off from the top of a cactus. Gylfi's voice almost broke here. He thought he was flying toward the stars, and he slammed into the earth. That's what moon blinking is all about. You no longer know what is for sure and what is not, what is truth and what are lies, what is real and what is false. That is being moon blinked. Soren gasped. This is awful. Is that what is going to happen to us? Not if we can help it, Soren. What can we do? I'm not sure. Let me think a while. Meanwhile, try to cock your head just a bit so the moon does not shine straight down on it. And remember, when flying in full shine, there is no problem, but sleeping in it is disastrous. I can't fly yet, Soren said softly. Well, just be sure you don't sleep. Soren cocked his head, and while doing so, tipped his beak down to look upon the little elf owl. How, he wondered, was such a tiny creature so smart? He hoped with all his might that Gylfi would come up with something, some idea. Just as he was thinking this, there was a sharp bark. 12-1! Head straight, beak up! It was another sleep monitor. He felt a thwack to the side of his head. They did not fall asleep, and as soon as the patrolling owl left, they began whispering again. But then, all too soon, came the inevitable alarm for a sleep march to begin. It would be 3 more circuits before they could meet again under the arch. Remember what I told you. Don't sleep. I'm so tired. How can I help it? Think of anything. What? Anything, Gylfie hesitated before a sleep monitor shoved her along. Think of flying. Flying, yes, thinking of flying would keep Soren awake. There was nothing more exciting. But in the meantime, all thoughts of flight were drowned out by the sound of his own voice repeating his own name. Soren, 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 Soren. There was also the sound of thousands of talons clicking on the hard stone surface as they marched in lines. Soren was between Hortense and a horned owl whose name blended into the drone of other names. 3 snowy owls were directly in front of him. There were perhaps 20 or more owls to each group, all arranged in loose lines, but they moved in unison as one block of owls, each owl endlessly repeating his or her name. It was impossible to sort out an individual name from the babble, and it was not long when, on the 4th sleep march, his own name began to sound odd to Soren. Within another 100 or so times of repeating it, it seemed almost as if it was not a name at all. It was merely a noise. And he too was becoming a meaningless creature with no real name, no family, but maybe a friend? Finally they stopped again, and it was in the silence of that moment when they stopped that Soren suddenly realized what was happening. It all made sense, particularly when he thought of what Gylfie had explained to him about moon blinking. This alone would keep him awake until he met up with her again. They are moon blinking us with our names, Gylfie, Soren gasped as he edged in close to the little owl under the stone arch. Only the stars twinkled above. Gylfie understood immediately. A name endlessly repeated became a meaningless sound. It completely lost its individuality, its significance. It would dissolve into nothingness. Soren continued. Just move your beak or say your number, but don't say your name. That way it will stay your name. There would, however, be at least 3 more nights of full shine, and then the fullness would begin to lessen until the moon was completely drenched. Gylfie looked at Soren in amazement. This ordinary barn owl was in his own way quite extraordinary. This was absolutely brilliant. Gylfie felt more than ever compelled to figure out a solution to sleeping exposed to full shine. All right, so Soren has an idea, and he suggests moving their beak without actually saying their name so that they don't become moon blinked. And their idea is to not look directly at the moon, but kind of a little so that they don't get in trouble, but enough so that they're looking towards it. And instead of saying their names, just moving their beak, like so it looks like they're saying it out loud. That way they won't lose the meaning of their name, and that way their names stay their names. Sounds like a good idea, huh? All right, chapter 6, Separate Pits, One Mind. When Soren and Gylfie parted at the end of that long night, they looked at each other and blinked, trembling with fear. If only they could be together in the same pit, then they could think together, talk, and plan. Gylfie had told Soren a little about her pit. She too had a pit guardian who seemed very nice, at least compared to Jat and Jut or Skench. Gylfie's pit guardian was called Unk, short for uncle. And, like Auntie, he tried to arrange special treats for Gylfie. A bit of snake sometimes, often even calling Gylfie by her real name and not her number. 25, too. Indeed, when Gylfie had told Soren how her pit guardian had asked her to call him Unk, it was almost identical to the way in which Aunt Finny had insisted on Soren calling her Auntie. It was all so weird, Gylfie had said. I called him Sir at first, and then he said, Sir, all this formality? Really now? Remember what I asked you to call me. Uncle, I answered. Now, I gave you my special name. The special name was Unk, and the way in which Gylfie described Unk, drawing that name of endearment from her, well, Soren could just imagine the great horned owl dipping low to be on eye level with the little elf owl, the huge tufts above his ears nearly scraping the ground. The pit guardians go out of their way to be nice to us, Soren had said. But it's still kind of scary, isn't it? Very, Gylfie had replied. It was after I called him Unk that he gave me the bits of snake. She had then sighed. I remember so well, as if it was yesterday, my first snake ceremony. Dad had saved the rattles for me and my sisters to play with. And you know what, Soren? It was as if Unk had read my mind because I was thinking about my ceremony. And just then he says, I might even have some rattles for you to play with. And then I thanked him. I overthinked him. It was disgusting, Soren." And Soren knew just what the little elf owl meant. But now they were separated, and Soren hoped desperately that Gylfi would come up with some solution. And Gylfi, once more stuffed with some extra snake bits that Unk had given her, had become very drowsy in her pit. Unk had even allowed her to sneak in some extra sleep, another little treat. Or was it a bribe? But Gylfi could not sleep. She would be on the brink of sleep, drowsy with the succulent snake meat she had gorged on. Much too much for an owl of her size. But just as she was about to fall asleep, something would prick her dim consciousness, some thought. Soren, in the pit next door, was concentrating as hard as he could. "Think of something, Gylfi. Think of something." Auntie had been so nice. When Soren returned to the stone pit, she had said that she'd never seen a more tired-looking owl. "Didn't sleep a wink, huh?" "'Fraid not, Auntie," Soren had replied. "Now, you hear me. Why don't you hop up there in that little stone niche just your size and out of prying eyes and take yourself a little blink or two?" "You mean sleep?" The question just slipped out. "Sorry about the question." "Of course, dear. I mean sleep, and don't apologize about the question. We'll get stricter with that later." "But it's against the rules. We're supposed to be getting ready for our work assignments." "Sometimes rules are made to be broken. In my opinion, they should go much easier on you owlets after you first arrive. You're orphans, for Glock's sake." It still disturbed Soren deeply to be called an orphan. He had a mother and a father and a sister and a brother. He wasn't sure why, but there was something shameful about being called an orphan, especially when one wasn't. It was as if you were this disconnected creature. "I know," Auntie continued. "I'm just an old broody." What was a broody? Soren wondered, but he suppressed the urge to ask. Soren hopped up onto the stone niche. "My goodness," he thought, "I did that rather well. Could have passed my branching test on that one." And then he became very sad when he thought that he had not even been able to begin his first branching lessons with his father. Sleep indeed was hard to come by, even a blink or two, because when Soren started to think about branching, he, of course, could not help but think about flying, and remembered watching Clud's attempts, and finally his first very small flight. Something pushed at the back of Soren's brain, a memory. Soren was not sure how long he had been sleeping, but it was not Auntie who woke him up. It was something else, something unspeakable. Once more he felt that terrible queasiness mixed with dread. It was as if his gizzard might burst, but the terrible truth settled like a stone inside him. Clud had pushed him. It came to him in a flash, so real that he could still feel the swift kick of Clud's talons in his side and then pitching over the edge of the hollow. His legs began to shake. Auntie was at his side. "Need to yarp, dear?" "Yes," Soren said weakly. He yarped, a miserable little pellet. What did he expect? He had never even had his first bone ceremony, which again made him remember all of Clud strutting about when he yarped his first pellet with bones. Would they have such things as first bone ceremonies here? They did everything so strangely. The number ceremony, for example, they called that a ceremony? Ceremonies were supposed to make you feel special. The number ceremony hadn't made him feel anything. Auntie Finny was nice, but the others really weren't so nice at all. And this orphanage business, what was that all about? What was the real purpose of St. Aggie's? Skench, the Obla General, said, "When truth is found, purpose is revealed. No questions, just be humble." The only truth that Soren knew right now was a deep gizzard chilling one. His brother had shoved him from the nest. "Think, Gylfi," thought Soren. "Think of something." All right, so now he has this memory that he was pushed from the nest by his brother Clud. And the next chapter is chapter 7, The Great Scheme. So we will read that the next time. I hope you enjoyed chapter 5 and 6.